Hello, fellow readers. This is Amelia Albanese for another book review in my car again. It's a little warm today, but if I can get through this, hopefully you guys can too. Today's book review is going to be about Mrs. Sherlock Holmes by Brad Ricca, narrated by David Bendena. Yes, I listened to another audiobook. That seems to be the only way I can get through books lately with my commute. So, Mrs. Sherlock Holmes is actually based in the early 1900s, so it's during the women's suffragette movement, a time where women's rights were a very gray area. There really wasn't much of women's rights. They had some legal rights. For example, Mrs. Sherlock Holmes, the main character, her nickname, her real name is Mrs. Grace Humiston throughout the book. Now, she, for example, is a lawyer. She is legally allowed to be a lawyer, even though women aren't allowed to vote. But at the same time, you can see that when she goes to school, she's ridiculed by her peers, her male peers. A lot of women had the right to go to school, but they were often rejected from certain schools because that was the school's right to do so. So it's very interesting, enlightening to read on that historical view. It can also be very frustrating as a woman to read about that time period, but it's definitely something that's important to read in order to get a better grasp of our history. The book itself, the way it's told, the story, is almost journalistic. So it's kind of like somebody reading off of newspaper articles. It's not very story form so much, but it's incorporated with the story form. So every once in a while you have a little dialogue, but the dialogue is pretty minimal, considering. However, I still found it enjoyable. It was a different way of putting together the book, putting together a book in general. So I admire that. I admire a little bit of creativity. It was overall enjoyable and very intriguing. A good history lesson, basically. Although I will say that it does require a little more focus when you're listening, because there are some details that if you're not paying attention, you're gonna miss it, and it's kind of important. You need to pay attention into this book. Let me see what else. Okay, so Mrs. Grace Humiston, throughout the book you get to see her solving different cases. She is a lawyer, however, she treats her job more like an investigator sometimes. If something doesn't sound right, if she's defending someone there, and usually she was defending immigrants, so she often had to kind of do some investigative work on her own in order to figure out why they're being mistreated, why they aren't having their rights given to them. So that was mainly the kind of work that she did. And there is one case in particular that the book focuses on, and that's about what they call the young skater. It's a young girl who goes missing. Now, missing girls end up becoming a main focus for Grace Humiston because of this particular case. Through her investigative work, she finds that there are a lot of young girls that go missing that the police tend to just brush off, just because they tend to label these missing girls as wayward girls, girls that they assume just ran away from home or ran off with a boyfriend, or found a new lover, or something like that. So throughout the story, you eventually get to the point where there's this case that the police department cannot solve, but Grace Humiston can. And even though she is praised and revered for a short period of time because of her work that nobody else could do, shortly after that, the police department comes into question as to why couldn't they solve it? Why couldn't these group of men solve a case that a woman could? because of that, they go under investigation, the whole police department, and there's a motorcycle section that all specifically went under investigation. And with that, then poor Miss Grace Humiston, Mrs. Sherlock Holmes, ends up getting under people's bad side. So for a very short time, she was revered, and then after that, she was ridiculed. She'd made an enemy of the police department, and from thereafter, it's kind of sad to see how her reputation goes, but I'll let you read that on your own. I don't like to give too many spoilers. But from what you gather by watching Mrs. Grace Humiston, she's a very caring, kind, determined woman, which is extremely admirable. She's quite impressive, really, especially for her time period where women were held back so much. So it's amazing to see what she was capable of and how determined she was to help other people who really didn't have much of a voice, which is why she focused so much on helping women and immigrants, because so many immigrants were coming to this country and they didn't have many rights, and they were being taken advantage of by lawyers, businesses, being trafficked. It's just very sad. Of course, some of that hasn't really changed too much, but it's refreshing to see that there are some people who are still heroes, essentially. And it started a long time ago with someone who has been dubbed Mrs. Sherlock Holmes, which, by the way, that nickname, you never hear her really hear her called that within the book. I wonder if that's something that's kind of got started after she died, just because she was so smart and she saw things that nobody else seemed to. Or maybe she was just more determined than anyone else. But she was very smart. She knew the legal system very well. She knew how to find loopholes in order to help people. So it was a very good read, very educational. If you're looking for something like that, I enjoyed it a lot. But like I said, you do kind of have to focus. So it's not like one of those light reads. However, I do recommend it. I really, really liked it. And then a quick note on the narrator, David Bendena. I thought he did a really good job. Sometimes when people take on other voices, it can be distracting. However, I liked how he had a very light accent for some of the immigrants who needed it. He softened his voice when it came to the women, hardened them when it came to the men. I thought he was very believable. He didn't distract me with his accents and his different tones of voice. It just went along with the whole book. So I thought that was very impressive. So that is my take on Mrs. Sherlock Holmes by Brad Ricca. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any comments or varying thoughts or anything to add, please give me some comments at the bottom. I would love to discuss them. Like I said before, I love to discuss books. I'm not here for arguing. I just love different opinions and different viewpoints of how different books take. I'm a literature major, so this is what I still like to do. If you want to see more of my reviews or what else I'm up to, please feel free to check me out at ameliama.com. And next I will be having another book review on Norse mythology, actually, by Neil Gaiman. So hope you can join me for that one. Until next time, thank you for joining me.